I am going to speak first from an American perspective for about 3 minutes, and then I'm going to ask James to speak from a Chinese perspective for about 3 minutes, and then we'll open up the floor. Since there aren't too many people here, I think we can have an extended, ongoing conversation here about this. But this is a really vital matter. First of all, let me speak from an American perspective. Now, I am a Hong Konger, so I am detached from America, but it also gives me an interesting view of what's been going on. Trump does represent a rejection of what America has stood for the last, since the end of World War II, I think, of the idea that America stands for democracy, it stands for human rights. Certainly, America has not always carried this out. And many people around the world have criticized America for being hypocritical in many of its policies and so on. We know this very well. I don't need to go into this in detail. But America, at least in its rhetoric and in many of its actions, has stood for the idea of democracy, human rights, aiding the democratic world as against China and Russia. And so China has been viewed as a foe for that reason, really, at least in a cold sense. With Donald Trump, we see this massive change where America is no longer on the side of Europe, no longer on the side of Japan, of Korea, of many of these countries that have been democratic. Instead, America is on the side of what many Americans see as autocrats, people like Vladimir Putin, to bring up the best example. And this is completely shocking. Now, it's also shocking to many that America is abandoning so many of its global commitments. Voice of America is one, but certainly U.S. aid in general, aid to much of the developing world, is gone now. Courts have temporarily phased that, but nonetheless, this is what's happening. And so many of us are wondering what's happening to America. It's become unrecognizable. Now, where this will eventually go, we don't know. Can Trump really carry this through, or will either the courts or perhaps more likely voters throw him out after 4 years, and he can't be president after 4 years, but leading to a Democratic Congress after two. He does have minority support in America, judging from opinion polls. But having said that, these changes are taking place, making America into a radically different place from what many of us recognize. Now, before I stop here, the other question to raise is what's happening to anthropology? And that too is fairly remarkable because anthropology, even though anthropologists have been critical of American governance, anthropologists, as much as any other group in America, are very supportive of things like democracy, human rights, and so on. And so as I think several anthropologists have told me in private, anthropologists have never supported Trump, and you can't find an anthropologist who supports somebody like Donald Trump. One of the last things Thomas Hyland Erickson wrote in a paper for our Values Commission was something to the effect that I have never met an anthropologist who supports Trump. So the discipline in its basic values is indeed opposed to what Trump stands for, and in turn, anthropology is suffering. Departments in the U.S. are losing money. The American Anthropologist has a recent issue talking about departments that are being shut down. But beyond that, certainly the funding issues at places like Columbia are going to spread to universities all over, and anthropology is likely to suffer. So there is a direct anthropological effect, a rather negative effect, that the Trump administration will have. So these are the two themes that I want to go into today. First of all, the Trump administration in general and what it's done to global politics and how we can view this as anthropologists. And two, what this is specifically doing to anthropology. And both of these are fair game and we'll talk. But the first person to talk, James, you're on, because I want you to talk about what I've just said from a Chinese perspective.
Hi, good evening. It's about 10:20 p.m. our time. Well, I really kind of surprised by what Trump is doing right now. But there's one thing I think we are as an anthropologist, we know anthropologists has been suffering for a long time in many countries. the program has been cut or the research funding has been cut. So it's not just because of Trump. Probably what he's been doing, especially Gordon talk about USAID, close of USAID, probably will affect more anthropological research. We all know that politics is about power, and we all know for Chinese anthropologists, we kind of used it. We all know power and politics will affect academic research. That's for sure. I recently have I've written an article about history of applied anthropology in China for that encyclopedia of applied anthropology. So in that article, I mentioned about in the 50s, when anthropology as a discipline was eliminated from university and was completely replaced by ethnology. That's because of politics, because change of the power in China. But somehow a lot of anthropologists, they switch their job, get kind of a new jobs so from the government. Talk about like what is called ethnic or identification of ethnic groups. So that's kind of a major project for a lot of anthropologists to do for a long time, about 20 years. So this is one thing. Then we know in the 80s, China opened up, the political situation changed. So open up and economic development or rapid or fast economic development brought about a lot of problems, social problems, cultural problems, all those. Then this gives chance for anthropologists to come back. So you can see that. So recently, Chinese anthropologists, anthropologists in China for a long time focused or doing the research inside China, not like USA, all over the place in the whole world. But somehow recently, because of the Chinese government policy, we'll talk about Belt and Road, Belt and Road, their policy, and also the Chinese about this human, what is it called, community of human destiny, or all those kind of government programs. So these, well, the government provide fundings, research. So for anthropologists to do research outside China. So you can see now Chinese anthropologists in Africa, Chinese anthropologists in South America, in Central Asia, it's Belt and Road. So you can just see somehow, if you think about this Trump, what is he doing right now? That's will definitely affect anthropological research in USA. Not just anthropology research. I know that a lot of science, talk about natural science research, their funding has been stopped because of Trump. Anyway, I just say, if we look at the whole world right now, if the economic situation can continue to go down, or if we might expect anthropology research more, if you talk about more, what is called more, this will bring more kind of a bad impact on anthropology. So, well, probably we need to remember as anthropologists, me as an anthropologist, we believe a better world. This is what I think we all anthropologists are working for. We believe the world that nobody goes hungry. We believe that the world that everybody is fair, everybody is equal. But this is what Gordon mentioned about American style But still, even though we know the whole world is like that, go up and down, the human history is like that. So if Trump
Now,
might,
James, let me interrupt to ask you a quick question here because what you say about anthropology makes perfect sense. But what about this? America, in the last several months, has withdrawn itself from the global stage as an exemplar. China has wanted to be an exemplar, but people have resisted. They say China's a dictatorship, it censors media, and so on. Is China going to look more attractive to the world now, do you think?
well, I think China, well, that depends on it all depends on the economic situation in China. I think China has its own is a country with that huge population. Okay, so we have its own problems. Even though has been criticized by a lot of Westerners, but if you look at Chinese living standard, if you look at you know I'm the person who, I still remember in the 70s. I often went to Hungary. And we remember in the 80s, what happened in the 80s, 90s. So I'm the person who lived through all those in the short period of time. Life has been changed. What is more important is the life people live longer. Life expectancy now in China is kind of so this is all been happening under so-called dictatorship. But you want then if you have anthropology, if you study what has been happening in China, if we talk about sustainable development, if we talk about this is all, you know, if you say people, talk to people as a whole, or just for some rich people to be richer. So so in Chinese case, and I'm kind of worried about Trump. America is good enough. I don't know why he want to make American great again, to be at the cost of other people from other countries. This is just something probably we need to think about.
And many of us would completely, and totally agree with you on that. I've the reason why James and I are co-hosting this is because we're wondering what kinds of world models will emerge in the future, given what's happened to America, and also, of course, looking at anthropology. So we have a double-tiered discussion here um, of both world politics seen from an anthropological perspective, and also anthropology itself. So who wants to jump in now?
I can jump
DJ,
in if you permit me.
please do.
And yes, and I will have a slightly different approach. That approach is to say that much as we see Mr. Trump as very unusual, as different in some curious ways from the American presidents we've been watching, much as I do that. And I must say that America held a certain fascination for me, starting from my teenage years. The voice of America that you mentioned, the voice of America that you talked about, my day wasn't complete until I listened to it. There was this program that was called News in Special English. Politics at that point wasn't making a lot of sense to me, but there was an attraction for a young boy trying to learn English language, and News in Special English, was some of the best tools I had got. I can still remember a number of broadcasters at the time, George, many of them, the male, the female. So the point is, I got personally fascinated with America. President after president in that part of the world, for me, became the best model you could get for democracy. It was the heydays of the so-called Cold War, the Soviet Union and America. But I couldn't, for all the money in the world, side the USSR. You know, perhaps the Americans' own message, narratives, had gotten so much into me, and I wonder if I have managed to even win myself of it up to this moment, that whatever Soviet Union did, for me, it could have come from the devil's own headquarters. Perhaps with maturity, I could have modified the approach, but it's just to say that those things we were seeing from America's presidency changed when Trump came in. It continued right up to the last of your presidents. But I haven't said all this. I'm inclined to look at it as America's internal affairs, to use the political scientific cliche. It's America's internal affairs. And much as some of us do not find it attractive, you know, will not, if your election was such that could be extended to everyone in the world, I am one of those who wouldn't vote for the gentleman in charge now. But having said so, I underline again that I'm inclined, and with all honesty, to see that as an internal affair of one of the countries of the world, even if we are going to say undebatably is the most powerful, maybe the richest and all that. So I think that is what I would say for the first segment of the discussion. And then we come to anthropology, which is where I am, I think I belong to, and I will show more interest in. And I will say that the way we have taught ourselves anthropology in this part of the world, certainly in my part of Africa, which is West Africa, Nigeria in particular, is that we try to separate the two things. What are the two things? We try to separate anthropology from what politicians are doing. What politicians are doing, we don't mix it up with what anthropology should be doing. And I'll tell you why. We had a very, very bad experience from the melange, from the mixture of political and anthropological interests. And that's during the colonial period. Indeed, if we have made progress of washing off political taint on anthropology, it's just very recently. The colonizer made a very bad use of anthropology, agreed that, as I have said in a number of my own publications, there were also anthropologists who worked as anthropology. And what is that focus that anthropology should take? I think it's captured in one remark that James made in his intervention. James said, and I think I'm quoting him correctly, that anthropology believes that every group is equal, every body is equal. I think that's how he put it. And I think that is what it should be the takeoff point, the starting point for any authentic anthropological project, which is this. We are all humans. We should work to protect and project our common humanity. And in doing that, it should start off by this particular remark that James have said, which is we are all equal, but we do our things differently. And so the task anthropology becomes to find out what are these differences, what are these similarities that human beings need to harness and
Okay,
find a
great, PJ,
common
but
ground.
30 more seconds, because 15 more
Yes.
seconds, because we move on.
Yes. So what I am saying in effect, and the 30 seconds can give it to me actually, is that we don't think, and I'm talking for people on this, in this part of the world, we don't think that whatever Trump or anybody does should affect the way we should function as anthropologists. Our associations can still be that. If a certain source of funding fails, we should be resourceful enough to look for alternative. Indeed, as I talk with you now, I will be having a meeting on Friday with colleagues in Germany, where we were talking about a network of medical anthropologists for Africa. And we were talking as anthropologists, not as people who are going to, if you permit the use of the metaphor, go cap in hand, seeking for what government should help us. Indeed, speaking for myself, once government brings funding and it is directly identified as coming from government, I am usually suspicious. For my
great. You've raised a number of important points, and we appreciate them, both in terms of the long history of your relation to the U.S. and in terms of anthropological funding and so on and how that works. Great. Now, a couple of people have sent in messages here. Ed went ahead and made a list of he gave websites about how the Trump government has banned from U.S. government certain forms of language. Ed, you'll be talking about that in a while, and that's important. And then Leah brought up the very important point that we're using the term America, which could really be unpleasant for you because it should be the USA. I mean, I'm doing this too. We're using the word America. We sound like Donald Trump now, the Gulf of America instead of the Gulf of Mexico. And I apologize for that. That's true. We are speaking too loosely, but you're quite right. And then Michelle wrote, for the first time in more than a century, Canada is seriously wondering whether the USA plans to invade us. I'll believe it when I see it, but yeah, that's a real comment now that has to be taken seriously. Bella, your hand's been up for a while. Speak up.
Yes, I am trying to say something. In fact, good morning, good evening, good afternoon to everybody. We are in different time schedules. But what I would like to do is really to bring this discussion back to the issue of global contemporary politics and anthropology, because I see here, for instance, Ed, I see Leah, I see Sylvia, I see I think that uh, other people like Christiana, people that in their home countries are, and in Brazil we can say that we are witnessing not only the influence of uh, Trump's actions, but also the advance of the far right. And this is essential to for our discussion, and also like how not only this present conjuncture affects anthropology, but also affects the subject that we study. I think that this is really the main, I feel that this will be the main central point of our discussion, and how us as a World Council of Anthropological Associations can help against the state of the arts, like by even, like trying to put people together, try to see how to fight the situation, or at least improve the situation that we are living
Yep.
in this conjuncture. I think that this also is related to our discussion about the future of anthropology. Like, and I think that would be interesting, very interesting that people that are living these situations in their countries, in their anthropology, bring issues to the to light for the discussion. I think that Enio Barreto, that is the incoming, that he just started vice president of ABA, is raising his hand, and I think that as we just signed a petition about the affect influences of Trump's policies in the South, the global South. Maybe I think that he wants to talk, but I think that
Okay.
we should really discuss this issue seriously from the standpoint of the place that we are living, and not only about the influences of China, but like what as anthropologists and how anthropology is being affected. In fact, in terms of the United States, we are like, it's crazy what is happening, because it's criminalization, even of education.
Yeah. Okay, and
So
fair enough. Those are good points, Bella.
I don't want to concentrate the discussion. I want to put more questions for discussion to involve people in the discussion, but not
Well,
about 10 minutes.
okay, but we are. I mean, we do want to involve everybody, and because we have a relatively small group today, we can afford to speak a little bit more fully. But your questions are quite right. Now, I do want to keep a double track here, if we can, of both talking about the particular effects on anthropology, but also how we as as anthropologists view the global situation. So we can be both macro and micro in the comments we want to make. And I think that's fair enough. Yeah. But good points. Henyo, you have your hand up. Speak up.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, colleagues. It's my first time here in a meeting at the World Anthropological Union. And I just have, 3 points to bring your attention to. One is that I don't know if WAU has received, but we issued a note of protest, not ABA personally, but the forum of the graduate programs in the humanities, social sciences, applied social sciences, linguistics, art, and literature. We recently, in last February, we issued this note of protest expressing our concern about the actions of the US president that seek to undermine, discredit, or delegitimize research in the humanities. I'm going to post the link to the Instagram card that this forum.
Has been posted at the WCAA.
Oh, that's nice. So this was one of our first reactions. The second point that I want to raise is that according to our, internal evaluations, we don't think that this trend will be halted. On the contrary, we are waiting for further radicalization from the Trump administration, and it will probably affect research and outreach activities in anthropology and the humanities in general in Brazil if these executive orders, for instance, have some kind of impact or effect on private philanthropy. Besides, the official government agencies that eventually provide financial support to research and activities in the humanities in Brazil, we will probably have some effects also in the private philanthropy, like, Ford Foundation and other organizations and funding institutions that have helped, to develop the field of anthropology in Brazil. And the third and last point that I want, to put for your consideration, this is a kind of a personal evaluation. I don't know if my colleagues from the directive of the Brazilian Association Anthropology will agree with me, but Bella is here to make comments and criticisms. But I think that if further radicalization is coming, as we evaluate, we have to start thinking about how to, work inside our institutions to welcome these colleagues, to open positions for them, because I understand that for some of them, the environment, the milieu, the institutional environment and milieu in the United States will become very tough for some of them. And I think that some of them will probably ask for a kind of, a scholar or an academic exile in other institutions. So I understand that it would be an important issue, to press our respective governments, the Ministry of Science, Technology, Culture, Education, whatever, to start opening positions and scholarships, short or long term, to welcome some of our colleagues that will probably have a very difficult and tough time in the near future. That's it. Thank you for your attention.
Good points, Henyo, and I appreciate them. We all do. Now, a couple of points. That letter did go out to all WCA delegates, and we will put it up in the WCA website, I think, without comment, but this is the ABA's letter. Now, your larger point about opening up Brazil, that makes perfect sense. I wrote an article for American Anthropologist a few years ago on how East Asia may be taking over from the United States as a center of anthropology just because jobs are available here. But ideologically, that may indeed well happen because jobs are available in Japan and China. So Brazil will join that whole group maybe in becoming a global haven for anthropology. That could well happen. Now, the next person I want to bring up here.
Already. I'm sorry. It's happening
Pardon?
already.
It's
We
happening
have-
already. Absolutely. Yeah.
We have
Yeah.
received throughout the years, also during after the dictatorship, we have received not only friends, like professionals, but also students.
Yeah.
We are receiving
It's already
many
beginning to
students
happen.
from Afghanistan, for instance, many countries.
Yeah. Great. Well, good. This is the direction of the world, I think. And Brazil obviously is in a far better situation for anthropology, at least at the immediate present, than the United States is. No doubt about it. So, yeah. Now, Ed, you can speak for America. You're in America. Speak up.
Yeah.
I don't actually have a lot to say. I will point out that I think that that Enyo is right in that this is going to continue and it's going to get worse and it's going to expand in scope. And it is bewildering to me. You should know that in the US election system, Trump did not get a majority of the votes of the people who voted. He had 49% of the voters, and yet he is treating this as though it was what we call a landslide, a mandate to proceed with this highly destabilizing and ill-informed, hate-driven political agenda. I believe that the responsibility of social scientists here in the US has two prongs to it, based on the foundational assessment that solid research provides the evidence that's used to create effective policy. So protecting research funding and training for research is an absolute priority for us as social scientists. And secondly, maintaining the integrity of the statistical agencies that collect data about US society and the world around us is another very high priority. So that gives us things to work on rather than just throwing our hands up in frustration and bewilderment. And I prefer to think about concrete solutions rather than just an infinite appreciation of the deep destabilizing problems that we face. So protecting research, protecting the integrity of the statistical agencies and the data that they collect and make accessible are two very strong priorities for us. And then personally, individually, organizationally, working to change the majority party in the Congress in the next elections, which will come in 2026, are things that I think we can focus on.
Okay, now we're a small group today, so anybody can ask any questions of anybody. Speak up. Ed, I'm going to ask you a couple of one immediate question now. Do you think that the change that's taken place is a 2 or 4 year blip, or do you anticipate that this is more of a long-term shift in values in the United States that will have these fairly profound implications for the world and for anthropology?
I think that the underlying values that either support or stay out of the way have been there for a long time. And I think that the immediate disruption and destruction of institutions that have taken place over the last 2 months are going to take many years to repair. So I do think that there will be political resistance to undertaking this repair, and it's going to be a long time. And I personally am concerned that the sort of undermining of trust and alliances around the world are going to be decades to come, as people wonder to themselves, what is to protect us from a new a U.S. administration coming in and simply undermining whatever trust and confidence has been rebuilt after Trump.
Yeah.
So it's not a very optimistic prognosis. I'm sorry to say, but I do think that ultimately these characters who are using the argument of efficiency and effectiveness to change the role of government in U.S. life, if they are actually dependent on data to demonstrate what works as efficient and effective, need to protect the data.
Ed, but can I ask you a question also? If you can, I think that would be great if you can tell us what the AAA is doing, because there is even this advocacy for projects that not everyone knows, in face of this political situation. In fact, like one issue that's very important and has been in Brazil for during Bolsonaro, but still is all this ideology of gender against diversity, and this is happening. And then there are at least 10 universities under siege now, or cutting, Trump is cutting education, it's against education. So what is it that is happening at the grassroots, at the AAA, and also, university?
Yeah.
I think that would be interesting to share this, and how can we help?
So I'll just say very, very quickly that the AAA's leadership since I left has changed considerably, and they are not taking nearly so activist a role. I see that Sylvia's hand is up, and maybe we can shift the focus some.
Yeah, Sylvia, you speak first, and then Michelle has some comments too, so then you speak up. Sylvia, go ahead.
Hi, everybody. Well, talking here from Argentina, where I think we have our own Trump, which is Milei, and he's a very good friend, excellent friend of Trump and Elon Musk. And what we see here, what we're living right now, there's actually a strike at the universities, but we're seeing exactly the same thing in the essays, and the government explicitly says that the state is strong. So that obviously has an impact in all aspects of society, the same way in the States. We could talk a lot about that. I disagree with one thing with PJ. I'm sorry, PJ, with this disagreement, but I do think politics is and should be enmeshed with anthropology. I believe that the prism is political. I think that we have to have this dialogue constantly, because we cannot separate ourselves, especially in our practice of anthropology at the universities, in doing research from the context. And so we are extremely concerned here, as you are there in the States and in other countries, with this, with extreme right and the way it's growing, and all its implications in terms of not only government cutting and spending, but also racist and hate discourse that is happening. So in that sense, I also agree with Ed. But I remember something remember Ed, when Bush became a president, and everybody said, well, and of course Reagan, and everybody said, this cannot be worse. It's not going to be worse, and it's going to take many years to repair. I remember that also. And then things got a little better. And so I think one should be a little hopeful, although things are very bad. So I think we have to discuss also, what are we going to do at the public level with anthropology and research in anthropology? What are we tell our students about our careers? Should people study anthropology and practice anthropology in this context? So I think there's a very important role right here of the associations. Thanks.
Sylvia, let me ask you a quick question, if I could, and then PJ, I'll let you jump in. But could an anthropologist, a legitimate anthropologist with some degree of integrity, support a political leader who we abhor? I've asked questions of, for example, Elizabeth Chin of American Anthropologist. Can an anthropologist support Donald Trump? Could an anthropologist support Bolsonaro or the Argentinian leader? I mean, is it possible, or does anthropology entail a certain political position?
That's a great question. I think Leah would probably agree that we don't know any anthropologists who support Milei, but yes, of course, like in the States, of course, there are anthropologists and other people who support that kind of government, obviously, or Erdogan or any other leader of this kind. So I think that, yeah, it's a contradiction for us. How do you deal with these tensions of someone who supposedly is progressive and open-minded and not racist and all this, and supports a right-wing government? And I'm sure there are colleagues who think this way. We don't know of any of them, because this is, and again, because the political is so much part of our lives, and and we don't separate it. We're constantly in this dialogue, and our every day, just working at a public university right now is a political act, because you support certain things that the government doesn't support. So yeah, it's also a moral question.
Yeah. And it's tough for me too in Hong Kong because, if I say the wrong thing, I could wind up in jail. So yes, I get this too. Now, PJ, you wanted to respond
Yes, it's not so much a problem of responding as to see if I could clarify, if I should explain what I mean. I share Sylvia's worry, but it is not exactly what I had in mind. Maybe it's a problem of language. I couldn't put it quite succinctly or exactly the way I had it in mind. What I mean is that anthropology can't afford to be subservient to politics, that the two are different fields of social activities. Anthropology has its own definition of task for itself. What is this task? That we should try as much as possible and know what the various human groups are, what they share with the others, and what is really different among them. Why? So that we find a way of mixing all of this and continuing in protection of our common humanity. So having said this, of course, if politicians do things that cause problem for this task, we can address those particular issues, those particular problems that they raise. I'll give an example. There was a time not too long ago, I think shortly before the IUES conference in Poland, where the government as such, politicians, tried to ban anthropology as a field of scientific, a field of inquiry. We all joined together and wrote and advised that this wasn't the right thing to do. Right here in Nigeria, there was a time too where the government tried to de-emphasize the place of anthropology as a field of inquiry not too long ago. They didn't ban it. I think even Gordon, if you remember, you said the helpful thing, which we found very encouraging. You said if it is something we couldn't handle locally, that you were all there for us, which I highly appreciate. So we wrote series of letters protesting. Why should you delete anthropology as a freestanding area of study? But in any case, you had some subjects, some sub-areas that anthropology is interested in, interspersed in some other social science discipline, that anthropology needs to stand on its own feet to even be able to produce experts who will be helping you understand some of these things. So in capsule, what I'm saying is that I'm not saying that we should ignore completely what politicians do, but that politicians should have us as hands made, to support them or maybe criticize opponents. I'll be very reluctant to support that point of view. That's just what I am saying. I'm sorry if I didn't manage to put it as clearly as it could be understood.
No, but you raise a good point, PJ. What I think you're arguing for is a degree of anthropological modesty. of we shouldn't pretend to be absolute experts in all these fields beyond our own. But then the question remains open of when can we speak out? Thomas Highland Erickson, my dear friend, died unfortunately a few months ago, but up until he died, we were having discussions about this. How much can anthropologists say? Very interesting question. Now, several people are waiting. Michelle, you have your comments. You got to speak up. And then Leah, you've been quiet and you got to speak up too. So both of you are on. Michelle, you go first.
Well, as I was noting, I think what we're seeing is the long-term product. It started in the 80s with Reagan and Thatcher, et cetera, where the United States, Reagan removed that requirement that media present both sides. And then you had the rise of talk radio, then Fox News. And now the far right are dominating the online blogs, online, I guess, media. So we see, I guess, this presence that has been decades in the making, and we have disinformation. We have state organized disinformation with Russian bot factories, et cetera. So I think as anthropologists, we must look at how do we counter such narratives? How do we help individuals to cut through all that misinformation that is being promoted? And there's some hope, at least in Orbán, hundreds of thousands are gathering to protest, the president, in a sense, trying to bring about change. So it's, again, we have our role to play in understanding how the media, how communication, how human nature, behavior, et cetera, is being used, manipulated in order to support these very far-right regimes. And as anthropologists, perhaps we have let go, perhaps forgotten that we should be looking at also the poor or the marginalized or the economically, I guess, and then figure out quite often these are the groups that are voting for their far-right policy. So how can we connect better with them and at least try to see how can you make the lower middle class worker in a factory, whether it's in China or the United States or in Brazil or elsewhere, how do you make them, in a sense, perhaps to look at other alternatives other than the extreme far right?
Yeah. And that's, of course, the extraordinary contradiction, that it is exactly the people who you would think would be most sympathetic to a discipline like anthropology who are in fact voting for the Trumps, the Orbáns, the Bolsonaros, the Melis, and so on, which is remarkable, but that's what we see. So, yeah.
So somebody might end up in prison writing the next version of Gramsci's notes from the prison.
Sure. It might be in the US. Yeah.
Yes.
Leah. Yeah.
Okay,
Leah.
thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if I have anything substantial to say. I would like to put some question marks into some assumptions that are being made. The first thing is why are we talking primarily, or why is the central topic the Trump's administration? Why are we coming back to that topic as if that is the central or the central topic for our anthropologists? And why are we focusing on the United States of America and on the NAA and, well, Trump again? The second question mark I would like to put, and this is very, something that I think we don't like to hear, we don't like to think, but I am 100% sure that there are a lot of anthropologists that are right-wing, that support the Trump administration. We don't or support Milei in Argentina or supported Bolsonaro in Brazil. I think that it is not a matter of if we say out loud, I support Milei, I don't myself, but if we say out loud, I support Milei, I think that it is a matter of looking at what we are doing as anthropologists. So, and that's bringing me to the third question mark. When we talk about anthropological values or values of anthropology, for example, publish or perish, is that an anthropological value? I think that we would like to believe that there are some values that are higher values that are universal, that are that come with anthropology from its beginning. But I think that, again, we have to look at what anthropologists are doing in their everyday life as anthropologists. What are they doing or saying in classes? What are they doing or saying in their field work? What are they doing or saying when they work in the government agencies? What are they doing or saying when they work in international agencies? I think that we can find there, not anthropologists saying I support Trump, but with their actions, they are indeed supporting right-wing values. And I think that that's the main issue here. The far right or the right-wing politics, I don't know if I am saying right in English, I think that we are facing changes in our common sense. And I think that's the issue that anthropology may reflect on. What are those values or those those values that we thought that were common for our societies? They're not the same for Argentina or for Brazil or the United States of America, but we know which values we think were common in our societies, and those values are changing. We're seeing it every day here in Argentina. Silvia shares some of them. But for example, we thought that in Argentina was that we were free to manifest ourselves when we didn't support a government decision. But apparently we are not anymore, and there are a lot of people that don't support that anymore. And that's why I think that the idea of the values is an ideal idea, but I think that we should focus ourselves in what we're doing as anthropologists. And the last question mark, well, the one question mark was why we're talking about America when you are referring to the USA, not to the whole continent. And the last one is this, again, why to focus in this antagonism between the USA and China.
Okay, well, let me just briefly comment on these, Leah. You're certainly right about the American focus now, but it has been the case that in the last couple of sessions we've had of the delegates meeting, it has been focused a bit more on Latin America, and I simply wanted to change the focus now. So, I mean, I think you can appreciate that. There's a lot of things going on in the world. Latin America is very important for anthropology, but we also need to look at other places. Now, America, you're probably right. Too much of a focus. Why only on Trump? That's true. He has power, but America is in decline very clearly. However, there are a lot of other things in the world that are worth looking at. I mean, for example, if one wanted to look at a right-wing dictator, more or less, who has been very successful, the model in the world would probably be Lee Kuan Yew of Singapore, who made Singapore into a very prosperous country over about 40 years, denying considerable freedom of expression, but it did work. And Singaporeans I know who are very dissident nonetheless have appreciation for him. So we do need to learn from these patterns all over the world that can be clear. And a question I would have to Latin American anthropology again is, you guys in Latin America are a little more politically active than many anthropologists in East Asia, and that's great, but we do need to look at a worldwide focus. So that's the only way we're trying to bring this in here. All that you said is perfectly fine, but I want to have this broader view, which I think you'd probably appreciate.
Yes, I wasn't, when I said that I put a question mark in the Trump administration as the focus of today's discussion, I am not trying to shift the focus into Latin America, not at all. I am not proposing to talk about Latin America. I am proposing to have a broader view, as you say, and I am proposing to shift our view and try to think more on not to discuss domestic North American things and try to discuss but not domestic things that has to do with the Trump administration. That's what I'm trying to say. But I'm trying to discuss, for example, these things about the values, anthropological values, try to refocus the conversation to anthropology. And I don't know if Latin American anthropologists are more active than any other anthropologists in the world. I think that we defined what activism means in different ways. And I think that the context and our histories mark the way we do anthropology. That's why I think we should focus on what we do as anthropologists and not on idealistics, on ideas of what anthropology should do or should be doing or should be supporting or should be valuing, etc.
Okay, great. And with this, I want to turn back to James. Now, a lot of people, I don't see your faces yet, so feel free to speak up. But James, I want to go back to you because China is an interesting example because China does have a dictator, number one, Xi Jinping, who's quite effective, but I think we could say that. China also limits what anthropologists can write. If you're in China, you can't write now about civil society. Gender studies is a bit dangerous now. Cultural identity, that's dangerous. Muslims, that's dangerous, but you can write about things like business, as you do, about food studies, about heritage studies. I mean, a lot of things are free. What China has effectively done is depoliticize anthropology in a way that's not happened elsewhere. Now, James, I'm putting you in the spot. I don't know how much you want to talk about this, but what can you say about this?
Well, it mentioned about about words that you cannot. You mentioned about you give us a list of those words that cannot be used. So we are used to it. In Chinese case, we know what kind of words. If you use it, you cannot get funding. Your paper cannot get published. So just get used to it. Anyway, in a way, Chinese anthropology might differ from other anthropology in other countries. Chinese anthropology start in 1920s because that was a time China, civil war, all sorts of problems in China. That's pretty much the lowest, means the bottom of the poorest condition ever. So the anthropology as a discipline was imported from the West to help the country to solve the problems. So that's kind of Chinese tradition, just to help to solve problems, to make, as Trump mentioned, but to make China better again. China always talk about Tang Dynasty. The Tang Dynasty had 1,000 years ago. That's at kind of a peak of their Chinese civilization. So now it's at the bottom. So what could then there's import. There's a lot of Western social science. So it's like Marxism is from the West, or communism is also from the West. So anthropology is from the West. So for I think that's kind of Chinese tradition. Chinese anthropologists get used to it. You just help identify social problems, help to make the society better again. Okay, so a lot of government we talk about like ever she came to power, okay, or became president. One of the things he did is talk about the poverty. What is the word for the poverty reduction or poverty elimination? Okay, that pretty much kind of a welcome by a lot of Chinese anthropologists. Chinese anthropologists, I mentioned about in the 50s, ethnic identity. So even when I returned to China in 2007, I went to some villages in Yunnan, far away from the cities. Living conditions there was horrible. I don't know. Anyway, that's that's 2007 or 2008. So now, ever since this guy came to power, you know, when I went back to those places again, we see highway, we see new houses, we see new schools. So it's just kind of a, you mentioned about Singapore examples. I would say for Chinese, for a lot of Chinese, what is important for a government is to make people's life better. No matter you mentioned about loss of freedom or no matter, but there is but what is good is life is better now as compared with before. So a lot of Chinese anthropologists, you say still not, you mentioned about you cannot talk about a lot of this, but you can still do a lot of this. About what today we mentioned about the rural, what is the word for that? Rural reconstruction.
Revitalization. Yep.
Yeah, there's it's kind of things like that because huge migration of farmers from the rural to cities, now back from cities back to rural areas because unemployment problems. So those are kind of a huge social issue, social problems. So a lot of these anthropologists, now the China government, a lot of government programs about identity. Is but you know, they talk about what is the word they use is a community of Chinese nationalities. So a lot of anthropologists are working for that. So
Yeah. So it's fascinating because we have really different visions of anthropology. Whether anthropologists
That's
should be active politically or whether no. Instead, you can aid your nation and stay out of political contestation. These are very different visions of what the discipline can be. Interesting. Now, Michelle, you had a bunch of comments online. Speak up.
Well, this ties in what James is saying in the sense that many states, they make a pact with their citizenry in the sense of, we won't give you as many political freedoms, but we will make the quality of life better for you. So, and very often citizens are ready to accept this deal if they see the quality of life getting better. And I think China is a good example of this. Russia in the early years of Putin was also, I guess, going down this route as well, saying, see, you had the chaotic, awful 90s, now life is getting better. So the population was willing to accept it. But Trump is quite interesting as, I guess, as he tries to be authoritarian, he wants to reset the economy, which means acknowledging that there will be a lot of suffering before reaching this kind of utopia that he wants, I guess, he wants to build. So at what point will the economic suffering get to the point where it'll undermine, I guess, the political? So I think we have to look at the larger forces at play and how politicians, in a sense, I guess, use these, I guess, the angst. And Argentina may be an example as how, there was was it 200% inflation rates, etc. And this certainly motivated a lot of the voters. But what happens when politicians don't deliver, can't deliver, and all of a sudden when it's seen to be not sufficient to simply have the better economic life?
And you raise, Michelle, a really important question, particularly in the context of China, which, after all of you remember, that's 20% of the world's population. We're looking at an extraordinarily important country here. And in China, Xi Jinping has made himself ruler for life. And interestingly, at the same time, the Chinese economy has been growing. It's been growing at 10% a year to a remarkable degree until the last several years. After COVID, it's fallen rather drastically. And so what's going to happen? If an election were held today and every society in the world voted, I would predict that Xi Jinping would get more positive votes than leaders in almost any other country in the world. However, that's going to go down as the economy begins to go down, and there will be far more contestation. We'll see what may come. James, is that correct, you think?
yeah, I just want to make one more comment. I still remember when I first went back to China in 2007. I work in the University of Economics and Finance. I meet a lot of economic professors. We had a really kind of hot debate in those years. They told me that for economists, what they care about is use less, use less resource, get more profits. Then they care nothing else. Then I argue with them. How about your environment? How about they talk about this? There was one slogan at that time. They said use market economy to open up those old, how to say, all those old villages in the mountains. This refers to ethnic areas. They talk about market economy in those years, 2007, 2008, okay? So it seems that market economy can help to solve all Chinese problems, but in fact, it didn't. Then, as time went by, you mentioned about after 2013, then they talk about the new Chinese development theory. In that theory, they mention about environment, about green environment, they mention about development is for everybody. So this just happens. So now, just within about 2007 to 2000, about 8 years. Because a lot of Chinese anthropologists working in environment protection areas, they realize this fast economic development cause environment degradation really fast. So this is kind of natural. So now Trump kind of maybe after a few years, we just since we'll come back.
Yeah, that's what I understand of China here, and we've got to consider that different Chinese version of anthropology. That's essential to remember in this context of an anthropology for the state, in a sense, but we'll see what happens depending on where China may go. Now, a number of you haven't spoken. We're getting to the closing minutes here. Is there anybody else who would like to speak? I mean, I see several photographs here, but raise your hand, speak up if anybody wants to say anything.
Well, I don't find my hand at the moment. I'm sorry.
That's
This
fine,
is
Mark.
Martin. Yeah, this is Martin from Germany. I just wanted to first apologize I came late. I mixed up time zones and anyway. And so I was just thinking of what we have been discussing here, what you have been discussing of actually a book that was published in 1942 by Ernst Fraenkel called The Dual State. And it describes the shift to authoritarianism and fascism in Germany as one of a shift from a constitutional state to a state of action. So where procedures and sort of constitutional forms of processing political issues are actually subsumed under certain aims that one wants to reach, right? So the action is the important one, and so everything is justified in order to reach a certain goal. And this you can see also in very small steps in Germany at the moment, for example, where you have politicians proclaiming an important goal, and then sort of they see themselves justified, for example, to impinge on the freedom of academic research. In Germany now, in the last 2 years, it's mainly about the very important topic of anti-Semitism and sort of coming down hard on people sort of demonstrating for, the situation in Gaza or elsewhere in the universities. And so you can see that within the German public, but also the German parliament, there is a shift of saying, oh, we can actually impinge on basic freedom, for example, freedom of expression, because we are striving for a higher good. And whatever that higher good is, if it's a better economy, if it's better whatnot, then doesn't matter, right? And this is very appealing at the moment. And so to make a long story short, I think it's important to actually keep in mind these very sort of constitutional questions that we are dealing with here, also for us in anthropology, to sort of hang on to certain constitutional rights, individual rights, and specifically the rights of academic research and so forth. Thank you.
And Martin, that makes sense for anthropology and also more in general. I mean, the issue of human rights. The Chinese government a couple of decades ago made a strong point that, hey, the right to make a living is also a human right. Much of my own research deals with asylum seekers now, and many of them have to claim being politically or economically, politically or religiously or ethnically persecuted. In fact, they're economically persecuted. They're coming to make a better life for themselves in the developed world. But that's not acceptable under current UN definitions. So how do we allocate between these different definitions of what human rights or human goods are? That's a really tough question. And the world as a whole is going to be facing this. And we anthropologists have to figure this out too, where we stand in this.
Yeah.
Okay. Danilin just came in here. Welcome, Danilin. Any other comments before we stop? Yeah, Danilin, you're here. I see your face. Yeah. Now, okay, let me then, in the last minutes here, I'm going to sum up in about 30 seconds or in 1 minute what we've been talking about, and please react if you disagree with this. We begin by talking a bit about the different Chinese and American perceptions of what's happening in the world in the last few months, and China as an alternative. We also spoke a bit about anthropology, with the United States in some trouble because it is being shut down anthropologically. China is more used to that. We also heard from Leah and Bella about how, hey, don't focus so much on America. There are other parts of the world too, like Latin America. That's a point well taken. But we do have these different definitions, both of governance, as Martin was saying, I mean, what human rights, what human goodness is, and of how anthropology should respond to this. I mean, James, you were making the basic point that anthropology should make their country better. Good point. But then the whole question is, what does it mean to make your country better? You and Leah, I would love to lock you up in a room and have you two guys argue for 5 hours to see if you'd have a common notion of this or if we're talking about something quite different. And I can't figure it out myself because I'm certainly sympathetic to the idea that, simply raising the standard of living of people, giving a better life to people it's extraordinarily important. But I also do believe in a lot of the values you're talking about, Leah. So I guess I leave this in a state of some confusion here. Any final words? Yeah.
I don't think you are leaving the stage. Leaving a state of confusion. I think the whole matter should go back to Leah. Leah said, we need to find out what anthropology is about in a better phrased way. That is what I'm also struggling to say. Which is this? If we know what our roles, our task is, then we'll have less trouble determining who is the world power and who is now emerging as an alternative to that world power. Because if you ask me, with all due modesty, I will say that is not the focus of anthropology. The anthropology, the way we see it, with all apologies to anybody who sees differently, is focusing on the smaller, weaker groups who have identity. This identity is sometimes threatened. And that's the only way anthropology seems to come in. I agree. If the policy of any sitting governmental power, any politician, tries to stop effective research and publication on this this category of our co-human beings, anthropology should speak up. But the bigger picture of politics, who is president, who is in international politics, the stronger power and all that. If you ask me, I wasn't going to pick my research topic from that, but I can pick my research topic on what actions or policies of such people impact on voiceless groups among the humanity. I'm sorry, that's the way I see politics. And to be able to address this without much problem, we return to Leah. If anybody has an outline, a definition of what are these values that anthropology should focus on, it will go a long way solving this problem.
Well,
my-
and PJ, we don't. And that's the whole big question. Anthropology does not, and that's something that we've all been dealing with in our different arguments here. How much should anthropology be expressly connected to politics, and how much should it be more removed, as you seem to be advocating? There's a lot of different values. It's all over the map. And we will leave it at that here, but I do want to give the last word today. I mean, Leah, you could speak up if you'd like, but I think Christine, you just introduced yourself. You've been listening in today. What do you think?
Yes, hello. My name is Christina Jacobsen. I'm the recently elected head of the Norwegian Anthropological Association, and this is my first delegate meeting with you. So I just wanted to say hi to everyone, and thank you very much for this interesting discussion. We're following it here in Norway as well, and we're also looking into with the association how we can mobilize to support colleagues in the US and elsewhere with what is currently happening. So thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to future meetings.
Great. Well, welcome. Thank you for coming, Christine. And any other last words, Leah or Sylvia or anybody else?
Yeah, I want to say something.
Okay, Bella, go ahead. Show me your
Yeah.
face then, but yes, show a
Yeah,
face.
Yes, okay. Here I am. Now, about what you said about human rights, I think that as anthropologists, we study what the meanings of human rights are in different situation contexts. So if you see the history of human rights, at some point it became a public during Carter's administration, it became really a public policy. And it became a public policy later in Argentina for many, many years. So, and now there is this contestation of human rights, with the freedom of expression versus human rights. Human rights have been criminalized, for instance, in different places, including in Brazil. So I think that we couldn't, when we cannot generalize concepts without contextualize. We need to contextualize concepts instead of generalizing. So it has many meanings, and now it's very complicated situation with the advancement of the far right and the denial of human rights. This is what this far right is about, and I think that it's important here not only to study the situation, but also to, again, I want to reinforce what we as anthropologists can do, not only analyzing, but also in terms of uniting against the state of affairs. And of course, we have to talk about U.S. because the U.S. influence is really very broad and affects all of us, I think. And
Excellent points,
I
Bella.
know
Yeah,
these are my final words, but for another discussion maybe.
yeah. I completely agree with what you just said. We need to unite. But remember, this is my final word here, and we'll stop just after I shut up because it's getting very late. But remember that human rights, I mean, is 80 years ago, anthropologists were saying we have nothing to say about human rights because of cultural relativism. That's what Melville Herskovits said very clearly in the 1940s. Then anthropologists did turn to human rights, but there are different versions of it that make it hard to unite. For example, Well, we can try to unite, but they're different enough so it's hard to say. We could bring in, James is a very liberal Chinese anthropologist, but I know a number of anthropologists who would say the government's right. Economics are all that counts. Now, I'm exaggerating, but you can hear some of that. So there are different views, and how we come up with common versions of value are so important. That's why WCAA exists, so that we can talk about these things and maybe begin to pave out a road toward disciplinary commonality. It's tough to do, as we can see tonight, but that's the aim. And I'm really happy that we have discussions like this, because this is how we begin to see our common values. So on that, I'm going to close. Thank you all for being here. This was a really exciting discussion, and Bella, you're going to lead, and Leah, you're going to lead the next discussion next time. Thank you.